Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Allow me to thank you all for being with me in this journey. Today, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk to you about sustainable agriculture in a changing climate. Ladies and gentlemen, we have talked about climate change, and it is real that climate change is a reality these days. And one of the impact that it has on agriculture could be quite a lot, including the fact that climate change leads to disruption of traditional patterns that we are used to. We are used to weather pattern that is consistent, but with climate change, we are now having things that are happening differently. If we expect the rains to be there between March, April, May, and we find it happening at different times, then you can see that change impacts a lot in agriculture. We have also been able to see the frequency of extreme weather events. Talk about drought, talk about very high temperatures, talk about even floods that we've not been able to be used to before. And all these affect quite a great deal of things. They affect mineral resources like soil and water, and they actually also affect or promote pests and diseases in agriculture. So if measures are not taken, then the impact can be very dire. So we always go for what we call sustainable agriculture. When we talk about unpredictable weather patterns, it is very clear that we have unreliable planting and even harvesting seasons that we are having. We also have a lot of mistimed activities when we were to depend on agriculture, as it were, before that the adverse effects that we are having. We consequently have what we call massive crop failure, or we even have reduced yields where we are going to be expecting them. Now, these extreme events that we are talking about will, to a large extent, lead to very increased frequency of drought and even floods, and even sometimes heat waves when they strike. And you are also aware of the storm. We are talking about severe storms, which also sometimes destroy crops. They also destroy essential agriculture infrastructure that we use in agricultural production. We also experience a lot about crop yield changes. You look at the fact that the yields are reducing. We are having growing shifts that we have not been able to anticipate. We are having a nutritional decline that we are having. We also have water scarcity and even poor water quality. And we have a lot of pests and diseases that we have not been able to envisage. So what does this mean for us? What is the implication? It implies that if we retain the business as usual without adapting a kind of practice that is sustainable, then we might all lose it. So then we go to sustainable agricultural practices. What are they? They include a lot about conservation agriculture that we have talked about previously. We have also mentioned about agroforestry, organic farming, and even efficient water management practices, because water is important in agricultural production. So if we were to look at this and adopt these sustainable means, then we would be able to address climate change and even the low productivity that we have been able to notice. Governments and many organizations that are in agriculture have been able to be very supportive. They support at the level of policy, they support at the level of training and building of capacities. Sometimes they also provide financial assistance to people who are engaged, whether small scale or commercial agriculture. And some of the ways by which we can talk about unsustainable practices that have led us to where we are, if we were to continue to do them, could be you still find people are using monoculture, for example, monocultural farming. We have people still doing excessive tillage. We have people who are still relying on synthetic inputs like pesticides, like fertilizers that are going to affect our production. So we look at all that. So we will have all these processes that exacerbate the vulnerability. When drought strike, when flood strike, when new pests come over, they take over and agricultural production appears like it's heavily affected. So if you look at excessive tillage that people are doing, monocultural practices that we are doing, or the heavy reliance on synthetic inputs, and even the use of insufficient or inefficient water management or irrigation management practices, if we continue to do slash and burn agriculture that we've been using, then we will lose out. So this brings us to some of the core sustainable practices that will work for us. What are some of the practices that will work in the wake of climate change so that we can do agricultural production in ways that indicate that we are aware about the state of affairs? What if we deal with conservation agriculture? We have been able to hear about conservation agriculture before. This actually is anchored on three main principles. The first being the minimum tillage or minimum disturbance of soil. Whenever you are engaged in agricultural production and development, then you happen to be using minimum disturbance, minimum tillage. Or we talk about the fact that we maintain permanent soil cover whenever we are having agricultural production. We tend to use crop residues, we tend to use cover crops, and we tend to use even practices like crop rotation, and those that are going to help us to break pest and disease life cycle. Those ones will be very important. The second one that we also must go for is agroforestry. Agroforestry is a process or a practice whereby we integrate shrubs with crops and even livestock in the same venture. So how does this happen? Is it possible that we can have a piece of land for agriculture, but we bring in, we have trees being planted on it, we have shrubs there, and we have livestock also coexisting with our crops? How is that important? It is important because it does help us to prevent erosion. It helps us to increase the biodiversity. You know how biodiversity is an important thing. It also helps us in improving soil fertility. How is that possible? So you look at nitrogen fixation, the fact that now we have crops and shrubs and livestock existing in one place, and that kind of mix, that nitrogen fixation process, where we have a lot of the natural processes happening. The third way by which we can promote this sustainable agricultural practice could be organic farming. We are all aware of organic farming. Is it possible that we can shy away from using synthetic fertilizers or even use of pesticides, so that we use the naturally occurring manure like compost manure that we are having, so that we have what we call an improved soil health? If we go this way, then it is possible that we can promote that. How about the next one, like water management? You know, water is an important resource in agriculture, particularly in most of our countries that are largely asset. They are called water scarce, and as such, then water becomes an important ingredient or input in agricultural production. Supposing we were to do drip irrigation, this kind of irrigation which uses very little amount of water, but then there is what we call precision. Water goes to where it ought to go, so that we promote it. It helps in promoting agricultural production. We also talk about crop diversification. Why do we diversify? It is important that we envisage a practice of planting a variety of crops in one place. We could even think about intercropping, we think about crop rotation and all those. It has a huge benefit, like it promotes soil fertility, it also controls pests and even diseases. And in the long run, it does promote food security and income stability, if we were to do that. We also think about smart agriculture. We've heard about smart agriculture being done. If you were to do all those things like engaging in new varieties, new seed varieties, engaging in things that work, things that are not really taking us behind, or things that are not business as usual, then we could be talking about that. Is it possible that we can generate income from a number of climate activities, like even carbon credits, carbon sequestration and all this, so that we can mainstream sustainable agricultural practices? If we do that, we will be saying that we now using sustainable agriculture. It has a lot of benefits. Good people, the benefits of relying on sustainable practices in agriculture could be a lot. Think about the kind of yields that we have produced in the wake of business as usual in agriculture. How about if we think of institutionalizing these sustainable means? then we improve yields. So when we improve yields, we also increase what we call food security. There is the whole thing about economic viability in whatever we are doing. We are talking about environmental protection. Is it possible that we can do our agriculture so that we can produce food within the idea that we also safeguard our environment? Or do you want to make food and then lose your environment? How about enhanced resilience, climate resilience, for example, if we do that? But then sustainable agriculture does not come for free. It has a lot of challenges. What are some of those challenges? If somebody has to leave the business as usual, the routine way of doing things to adopt this new means of farming, then it means that to some extent there are things that you will incur, like initial investment. So sometimes you want to have new irrigation systems. Sometimes you want to procure equipment that will enable you to live within that sustainability. Then that becomes one of the challenges. The other challenge could be knowledge gaps. We still have amongst us a lot of people, even subsistence farmers from across the globe, who do not have information around how they can deal with the agriculture in the wake of climate change. Supposing we were to build their capacity. The other one could be economic factors. So we have low access to credit, we have inefficient markets. Sometimes if we were to use sustainable agricultural practices and the produce that we have may not really be amenable to the current markets, what normally happens? And then the other one could be to do with the resistance to change. Imagine if you were to stop doing what you have been used to doing. Like if you were used to having your small piece of land and planting only one crop, like monoculture, and then now somebody is telling you to plant as many as possible, introduce even fruit trees, introduce animals in it. It requires a whole deal of culture change, a whole deal of social change, so that this happens. Ladies and gentlemen, today I was talking to you about how we can still do agriculture in the wake of climate change. And we have been able to say that agricultural practices must change because situations have changed. And what have changed in the situation? Climate change and all those things have been able to change. So if we were to do business as usual, we lose it. So we have to note that climate change impacts a great deal on agriculture. Look at pests and diseases. Look at its impact on water resources, on soil resources. Look at all those. And then look at the fact of what we have been doing and doing wrongly, those sustainable means that we have been doing. I've been able to also get you through to some of the sustainable practices, some of the new approaches that we can use in the wake of climate change, like conservation agriculture, agroforestry, organic farming, efficient water management, integrated pest management, crop diversification, and above all, going into climate smart agriculture. Good people, I want to stop it there today, and I want to appreciate you listening to me. Continue to do this only on Professor Oriaso Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Thanks.